And we're live. Hello and welcome to today's WordPress live session. Before we jump into today's interesting discussion, a few housekeeping updates. Black Friday is past us, and many people are already asking us for the bundle. It's the first time we've done a bundle of our plugins. We're definitely planning of doing it again. For those who missed it, it won't be a sale. We'll be offering it as a bundle, all our plugins, but we're still planning, so we still don't have a date or something like that. But we'll definitely, if you subscribe to our newsletter, we'll update you when it's available. Also, our WP2FA plugin has reached 90,000 active installations, and I'd like to thank everyone who's using the plugin. And if you're not using it, or if you don't have some sort of 2FA or multi-factor authentication on your website, you should definitely consider using our plugin, or any other plugin for that matter, but you should definitely consider using some sort of multi-factor authentication. I think that's about it for now. This is live, of course, so if you have any questions, you can ask us during this session, and we'll try our best to answer them. Today with me, I have most probably the strongest person, or one of the strongest people in the WordPress community, a person, of course, who has his fingers in a lot of pies. I'm sure a lot of people know him. It's Remkus. Hello, Remkus. How are you?
Hey, man. How's it going?
Good.
That's a funny introduction. One of the strongest. Yeah, maybe.
It's true. I mean, like, I've seen your numbers you have on your website, no? Like how much you deadlift, how much you...
I do. Yeah.
Interesting. Good. Not very, definitely very good. Much more than mine. That's for sure. So I'm sure most people know you, but for those who maybe still don't know you, can you maybe give us a bit of an introduction?
I can, but I never know where to start, to be fully honest. So I've been in the WordPress ecosystem for over 20 years now. Got lured into it way back in 2006, 7, and then really went in hard on the community side of things in 2008. Started organizing many meetups in the Netherlands. From meetups went to organizing WordCamp Netherlands. Started in 2009, and essentially been a version of a lead of WordCamp Netherlands until 2016. Co-founded WordCamp Europe in 2013, and that's on the community side. For what I do with WordPress, I have a relatively small agency where I have been focusing since 2010. I mean, I started using WordPress professionally in 2006, but 2010 was a big year because we got custom post types and custom taxonomies and a few other fun tools. But started doing the more complex, more high performance, high availability type of projects ever since, and haven't stopped. Recently, as in a couple of years ago, I started within WordPress, within WP.com, which is a newsletter, podcast, and courses, and many more things to come. I think that's the shortest TLDR I could have done. I'm sure I'm missing stuff. Oh, obviously, co-founding Scanfully together with my co-founder, Barry Koi.
Yeah, I was going to mention it because I saw some posts on LinkedIn today about Scanfully and some updates.
Yeah. We've had an interesting year. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I mean, it's an adventure with startups. It's always like that.
It is.
To be honest, it feels almost like a full circle, because I remember I came to the first WordCamp Europe. I remember seeing you. I mean, like, as we said, like, you're a big person, so you're very noticeable. And it almost feels like a full circle, because you back then had an agency with someone else. I think I mentioned this to you in Gdynia, and you were actually the first ever person to buy WP Activity Log, like one of the add-ons back then. So it's like,
yeah.
Wow, like impressive.
I remember.
Yeah. So yeah, jumping into the weeds right away. So yeah, I saw your presentation at WordCamp Gdynia.
Yep.
And yeah, you've been saying it a few other ones, and I've seen a few other podcasts of yours, and you've been saying this for years, like fast hosting does not mean fast websites. So let's get into the weeds right away. What is the biggest misconception people have about WordPress performance?
So performance, it begins with what is performance. Most people refer to performance when they actually are talking about speed. And the way they see how to get speed is slapping on a caching plugin or an optimization plugin or some sorts and turning on caching. And I think the biggest misconception is that this is performance. So the broader spectrum is something that you can add at the end of your build. The misconception there is that it should be part of your entire process as you're building a site. This is not an afterthought. This is something that you are building for and testing for as you're adding and changing stuff to your site. Meaning, to put it very, very concretely, in an ideal world, you want to understand every single impact of every single thing you add to the site. Meaning, if you add a plugin, you want to know what the impact of that plugin is. And you want to, even better, you want to understand the consequence of that choice. Meaning, and I always give this example, as this is one of my favorite ways of expressing what that actually means. Ideally, I want to go for the fastest solution out there for the problem I need to fix. So if it's SEO that I need to fix, I have a whole bunch of SEO plugins. I don't like rank math, so code quality is horrible. I'm never going to use that plugin because it gives a whole kind of issues. If I look at a high quality plugin, I look at Yoast. Yoast SEO is very complete. However, it is not as lean and mean as it technically could be. In other words, there's a plugin out there called the SEO Framework by Sibre de Waaier, also a fellow Dutchman. And that plugin does the basics and is the most performant one. However, I like the features that Yoast SEO provides. And I look at the difference and I go, if I look at my performance budget, meaning if my base empty version of WordPress is, I don't know, let's give it a number. Maybe it's 300 milliseconds. Then I give myself a performance budget of 1,000 minus 300 is 700. So within those 700 milliseconds, I want to solve all of my plugins. If I add a plugin and it shaves off, I don't know, 400 milliseconds, and another one does it in 200 milliseconds, then I need to have a really good reason to pick the 400 millisecond one. And that's essentially my the way I approach these more philosophical approaches to performance. And it's a much wider thing than just these two examples that I give. You don't slap on caching at the end and call it a day and call it, I've made it performant. Nor do you black and white look at every single thing that's being added to your WordPress site and determine that, I will always pick the fastest version because that's the best version. Best is it's relative. Just like what is the best hosting company? I have a very different look to that than most people. Most people look at best hosting company, meaning I look at their offer, I look at what money I'm having to spend per month, and then I look at how good the hosting is in terms of support. And I don't mind good support, but it's not the driver for me. I need the ultimate hardware software combination. That is the absolute best, measurably best hosting. And then I look at what does it cost. Then I look at how can I make this the most affordable. So I because I do a lot of performance optimizations for clients, I have to have an elitist point of view there. This is not where I can say, for instance, like with the plugins, I can't say like, oh, I'll just meddle and see what I can do with the hosting. My hardware just needs to be the best. So I think that pretty much sums up all of the main concerns that I have in terms of how people generally look at performance versus how I think they should be looking.
Very, very interesting. So basically, you're separating performance from speed. So
yeah,
regardless if the web host caching, whatever, that just come after. But first, you should make sure that you have the correct hardware. Forget cache. You have the right hardware to write the right website and the right number of plugins, the right setup on the website to run as fast as possible, as performant as possible, right?
Yeah. So, and it's you said number of plugins. I have sites out there from clients that have more than 100 plugins, and they resolve within 1 second, meaning they're quite performant for the monstrosities that they are. These are really old sites with a whole bunch of stuff going on, and a lot of tracking and stuff. So there's stuff that I can partially optimize and stuff that I just can't. Having said that, it is quite possible to have 100 plugins active. Some even have more, like 125, I think is probably the max. It just depends on what type of plugins they are and how have I measured this. So if I turn on the plugin, especially in this case, I look at the impact of it, and I determine if I allow that impact to be there. If it's not, and sometimes it's a plugin that I need to write an override for because the plugin itself is wonderful, but it does something it shouldn't be doing. We write an override and we reach out to the plugin builder and say, look, we'd love for you to have this fixed in your next release because it solves performance problem XYZ. But yeah, I approach all of these things from a mostly purist mindset.
Interesting. Yeah, in fact, plugins get blamed a lot for performance problems, and one can read a lot. Don't install too many plugins, and you see a lot of posts that like it's as if there's this hard limit on how much posts you can install. In fact, you have a very interesting blog post for those who I would recommend. By the way, for those who don't know about your website, they should definitely visit your website because you have some interesting blog posts. But you have one of them called "Stop Asking Which Plugins to Use." Can you explain those?
That's on Remkus.
Yeah, on remkus.vries.com. Perfect. Can you explain like the philosophy behind this? As in, like, me and you, maybe because you're saying, okay, I'll install a plugin. I'm happy if I can take those extra 200 milliseconds. But how can the average user, or what tools can they use, what they can measure to see, okay, this plugin is suitable for me or not, and how it's impacting their WordPress?
Yeah, so the reason behind that that I wrote that blog post is very straightforward. Since I've been doing more presentations about performance and the philosophy of performance, I pre-launched a course called Make WordPress Fast. It's on withinwp.com. And that all triggered a lot of people asking relatively the same type of questions. And one of those questions was, dude, I need to add a plugin for this functionality. Which is the best one? And basically looking at me like, tell me which is the best one. And they are specifically referring to performance. And I was like, if I do that, I bypass an opportunity for you to learn. Because if you just listen to everybody else and just take whatever everybody is telling you to do, then sure, you can with that advice can do a whole bunch of different things, but you're not really learning what it is in terms of impact that you're adding. So I was like, instead of asking me what plugin to add for, I gave the SEO example, but there's a whole bunch of different versions for that. How about I teach you how to learn how to discern whether this is a really good plugin for you to use or an okay plugin for you to use, or maybe even a really bad one. So that blog post is essentially saying, if you're going to ask me, I'm going to tell you to start looking into how do I measure the quality of a plugin. And there's various ways of doing this. There's WP CLI commands, there's WP profile, there's WP doctor. Both tell you some impact of, you run these commands before you install and activate the plugin, and you run it after, so you see the differences. There's a code profiler pro, which is a plugin that allows you to do a different type of scan as well, where you actually can see the impact of a plugin in terms of load speed and impact. You can use Query Monitor to measure what that plugin does on basically, it's an extension in the browser in your WordPress site that tells you a whole bunch of data. So you have, to your availability, a whole bunch of different data points. And it is those data points that you should turn into your toolbox, your tool set of understanding, how am I measuring impact? So that blog post was written with that in mind specifically.
I see. You've worked with some big companies. They're also listed on your website. What are the most common culprits you see when it comes to performance on websites?
I think there's the biggest thing is also, the way I see it, there's a tension between what marketing wants and what developers know they should add. And the delta between is the thing where, do we add it this way or do we add it that way? Or, oh, but I need it, is what marketing says. And then I think it is our task as builders, as developers, to not just blindly say, yes, of course, I'll add it to you and the site and consider it done. I have it ready ASAP. I think it should be our task to say, and this doesn't just concern performance. This concerns security, accessibility, a whole bunch of things that we want to have in place by default. The biggest thing is that if we don't teach ourselves to become better at the job, then we just do the job, which I don't think is a good place to start from. I don't think we are meant to just coast and lift and, kind of go like, yeah, I got it. I turned it into a website. It's working. Marketing is happy. Customers happy. But I think it is our task to also think in terms of what is the negative impact of this and relate that instead of just blindly accepting what it is. And the nice thing about large companies, you can push back. For smaller companies, it's maybe you have a site owner who's also doing the marketing and is also doing the technical part, and he's extending that to you, and then you are building the site, but you're very much reliant on what they're asking and what they're demanding of you. So it's a little bit more a one-on-one type of thing. That there's that introduces a certain complexity. Larger companies understand that they're asking, but they're also expecting you to push back. So it's a bit of both. You get thrown into situations more often, but you also have more room to explain and say, I get it, but here's the thing: if I want to do it the way you want to do it, I'm spending 2 weeks, a lot of testing, and I need to do a lot of optimizing in the code and all this and this and that. How about we match 80% of what you want, but I can do it in half the time, and I can do it in a more manageable, more higher quality, less technical debt inducing type of fashion. And I've learned they're very much open to those types of propositions if you indeed take in the time to explain the moment of choice that they're skipping over and you have to present.
I see. So it's not just about always code quality, it's also about the design of the solution, right? So let's say, as you said, typically marketing want to monitor A, B, and C, but developers say, oh, because of this, we're going to add 11 extra requests with every page load.
Yeah.
So it's more a
Yeah,
question of trying to find the right balance, no?
Exactly. And it is not the job of the marketeer to understand the impact of their choices on a technical side. It is our job to explain that. So if we're not explaining it, we end up with bloated systems. This is how we got to places where people think it's a smart thing to combine, I don't know, just gonna throw in some names that I really don't like working with, a Nevada theme on top of a WPML, on top of some funky old page builder construct that we used 10 years ago. And then are surprised that our loading time is almost 3 seconds for anything, and that the site only works when it's cached. Well, spoiler alert, you had choices there. You could have made better choices. Second of all, relying on caching, which is probably one of the problems I referenced as an answer to your first question. The problem with caching is assuming that everybody sees a cached version of your site. But there's a thing that's called cache hit ratio. That means there's a whole bunch of stuff on your site that will never be cached. There's entire URLs that will never be cached depending on what type of traffic you have. If people are logged in, they're never going to see a cached version of your site. So everything is going to be slow. And if you're an e-commerce solution and you figure, but I've cached my WooCommerce, my EDD, or whatever you're using, and you then not realize that from the moment somebody adds something in their cart, they're continuing the journey on your site fully uncached. So you can have whatever cache optimization plugin in there, it just doesn't work anymore in the way. Sure, assets are still cached, but if the rendering is the rendering, then it's still slow. So yeah, that's
for those maybe who are not familiar with caching, why and when some things are not cached?
So the most common one is the one I mentioned. That's the logged in state, meaning all membership sites or where you comment on or where you actually purchase something or add to cart, all of those instances, you are uncached. It's not as black and white as I'm presenting it, because there's a state in between that you can say I'm fragment caching certain elements of your experience, but roughly your experience is uncached. The second one is certainly on the marketing, and the thing that's called UTM tracking parameters. For the vast majority of sites, that means if you click on a site from a newsletter, on a link from a newsletter, you end up on the site with those tracking parameters following the permalink that you shared in the newsletter. And those tracking parameters, they invalidate your cache. So if you're sending out a newsletter, I don't know, to 50,000 people and, hi, my sale is live and go check it out right now, and everybody clicks that link, they will all see an uncached version of your site. Now, there are ways to mitigate that as well, but that needs to be done by your hosting company, or somebody who understands how to do this in other layers. So yeah, the cache hit ratio. These are there's two examples. There's a few more. There's just simple cache invalidation, because cache is valid until the end of the cache time that is set for it. So when you publish something new on your site, most caching plugins, they purge the whole cache and just go regenerate that when there's a new theme or a plugin update. For instance, if you use WP Rocket, you'll see it in the dashboard. Hey, there's a plugin change. Would you like me to release the cache now? In some cases that makes sense. In some cases it doesn't make sense. But all that is to say there are various scenarios of where your site visitors will run into a uncached version of your site.
I see.
And,
so,
yeah, no, I was going to say that, and it's you need to start with that assumption and not ignore it, what most people do. There's sites where you will not hit a higher cache hit ratio than 40%, meaning 60% of your site will not site visitors will not see an optimized version.
I see. And that's why it's important to first focus on having an actual well-performant website, and then the rest will follow, kind of thing.
Yeah, you build performance as you're building, and I'm not saying caching is wrong. I'm saying caching is really good, but there's different ways of caching. So you build for performance, and ideally you connect it to Cloudflare APO, which is the layer we call the edge. And the edge is nothing more, it's not the guitarist of U2. I know he runs with the same name. But the edge is essentially the layer that is in front of your website. So if you can cache at the edge, that means every single bit of traffic that hits your site that can see a fully cached version of your site will see a fully cached version of your site without your serving having to do anything. So Cloudflare APO is a wonderful solution for that. And it only costs like $5 a month. So it's not a huge disadvantage to the wallet. Then additionally, you have NitroPack, which is my favorite optimizer, together with WP Rocket. Those are good choices. And then there's stuff that you can do inside the WordPress application layer that provide optimized caching in some way or form, mostly object caching, some fragment caching, transient caching. Those are all different elements, and they are stored in different locations, but they all attribute to you understand that while you're building for it, certain things need to be cached in certain levels, and you kind of go down the application stack from the edge all the way to whatever happens on server, and then WordPress has the application layer in between. But you make conscious decisions. You don't just slap it on at the end and call it a day.
Of course. So in your opinion, a vanilla WordPress install with default theme, is that like a good base already? Is it performance? A vanilla install of WordPress? A vanilla install of WordPress, the default install of WordPress, without any plugins or anything. The core software itself, is it a good performance base to start with?
Is WordPress lean and mean? The core.
Exactly.
Is it? Absolutely is. Yeah.
Good. So if I'm starting a new website, you mentioned, I think I've read it in some of your blog posts, of course, you have to take some decisions before actually you start building that will determine whether the website remains fast or not long term. can you give us some pointers from where to start, what things you need to look out for? I mean, of course, we mentioned testing plugins. I think that's one of the biggest ones, right?
Yeah. So the logic is this. You should be a lazy developer. That should be your approach. And why do I say that? That means if you can root out certain things of repeating, then you should go for that. That should be your goal. And the reality of as you're building a site and you're testing for impact for various different solutions, plugins, you learn which combination of plugins and theme and settings inside of WordPress present a faster version of WordPress versus I'm just slapping on plugins and, just never minding anyone's business, but I just want to get this project done. So when you are, when you have come to a place where you understand the impact of the choices you've made, you have what's called a foundation. And the most important thing is that you spend maybe 1 day a month looking at your foundation. Is it still doing what it should be doing? That means on your local machine, you have one site that you use as a blueprint and you build from that blueprint. So every new site that you build starts with the choices you've made in that blueprint. So if you have local or studio or MAM Pro, whatever, you have the option to have one site as a base configuration. You have everything in there that needs to be in there because you've measured it, and you regularly test for it. Start with that. That already solves a lot of problems. You don't need to repeat yourself. There's a lot of stuff. Certainly, if you're feeling adventurous, there's a lot of stuff you can script in a WP CLI command where you just optimize all the settings inside of WordPress in one go, but you can save it as a site zip file. However you do it, it doesn't really matter, but there's a way for you to create a blueprint, a foundation. Start with that. Start with implementing that in your workflow, and you have already won a lot of battles.
And is it similar to security? Because you mentioned you should test it once a month, at least.
I mean, I test it more often myself, but at the very least, once a month, you process the updates that the plugins provide, and you check for every single plugin update to see what it does in your blueprint. Sometimes a plugin does something weird it's not supposed to do. We are all humans. We make mistakes. So any developer can introduce something that is a wonderful feature, but a horrible performance impact. I see it happen every now and then. So the idea is that you become aware of these choices, that they don't just creep in and all of a sudden you find yourself, yeah, but my blueprint is no longer fast. Well, this is why we test. This is why we double check, and check again.
I see. So the idea, okay, is to have a blueprint. So if you are an agency or a developer who builds websites for other people, you always start with this framework, and this is the basic when it comes to performance, and then you, of course, you build on top of that.
Yeah, that's how it should be. That was a weird sound I made.
And it's okay.
But it basically means every single impact is measured. Nothing is random anymore. You are in control, and the goal should be for you to be in control. I can't stress that enough. If you're just adding stuff and never looking at the impact of it, you are just horribly not in control. You may not feel it because it looks the way it looks and it works the way it should work, but you are technically not in control.
Okay, interesting. So all the Google measurements, all the other ones, those come after. First, you should measure the website directly, not on caching, on a local machine at least, and you can see actually.
Every single test that I do is uncached. So on that blueprint that you're creating, there's no caching active. All of the caching solutions in one way or another have a way to create what is their combination of settings. So you can turn that into a blueprint as well. But none of the tests that you do should be a cached version you're testing. If you build for performance, if you don't do any weird stuff inside of WordPress, you actually have to put in a little effort to result in poor front-end performance. Certainly with the default block theme and full site editing themes such as Ollie, you actually have to put in effort to create a slow version, because by default, WordPress core already takes care of a whole bunch of rendering and optimization. Now, on top of that, once the site is ready, when you have been testing for impact and all the performance things have been taken care of, your queries are running when they need to run, on which page load they need to run, your expensive queries, your slow queries, they are cached in transient, so they only have to run once every 24 hours instead of every single page load. That sort of thing. Then the only thing left is, once you push the site to production, now it's live, you turn on caching, and yes, you will go check the Google Lighthouse scores, or the core web vitals, however you want to call them, and that will tell you a story. And from there, you can start optimizing the front end output. And there's still a bunch of stuff that you can control in terms of what that front end output looks like, and how performant that is. But this is where you need to invest a little bit knowledge into what is it that I'm actually doing. And the most important thing to realize is that your Lighthouse checks, which tells you what your core web vitals are, your IMP, all that sort of stuff, that is a lab testing. That is a artificial testing. Yes, it's valuable in terms of what it tells you, but it's artificial. It's not real user monitoring testing, RUM. The latter, RUM testing, tells you what people actually experience in the browser on the internet. Lighthouse is essentially a lab test. Doesn't invalidate it, but it's a different understanding that you're looking at a lab test versus this is what people actually see. And roughly this means that RUM testing will show you that people see a worse site than your Lighthouse scores tell you. But there are solutions for ways to optimize the output besides the actual plugins like NitroPack and WP Rocket. And if you're thinking, hold on, I know other caching plugins, I've heard of other caching plugins, I'm not mentioning those because either I don't trust them, or I know the owner is an a-hole or whatever. There's a whole bunch of reasons why I'm not including certain things, or it's just outdated technology and just far better choices are available. That said, there's one plugin that I absolutely recommend everybody to have, and that's Perf Matters. The name of the plugin says it all. Performance matters, Perf Matters. What they allow you to do with that plugin is do a whole bunch of granular tweaks in terms of small but very important optimizations in terms of the stuff that's prefetched, preloaded, pre-connected, all that sort of stuff. And those can have a real value into what's actually happening and what's being loaded onto the site. And inside of Perf Matters, for instance, is also a thing they call the script loader, which allows you to say there are certain scripts that are running on every single page, but I don't need them on every single page. For instance, some form plugins, they still load their JavaScript and their CSS files on every single page your site services. But what if you're only having a form on your contact page and on your landing pages for the CTA, and that's it? Well, then you don't need it on all the other pages. So the script manager allows you to say, you know what, on the front page, I don't need to load contact page form stuff. So I'm just telling the script manager, don't load it here, but do load it on over here and over there where I'm actually using the form. And the rest is just, you hyper optimize the output. So most solutions that are optimizing front end performance, they look at what is there and they optimize what is there. So you can have your large CSS file turned into critical CSS, and that can be an improvement. You can have your JavaScripts maybe loaded later or in a different sequence. All of that sort of stuff you can play with. All of these plugins allow you to do that, but they don't allow you to say, I want this script here, yes or no, or so it allows you to remove stuff from the DOM that has no need being there, and that's a layer of optimization that Perf Matters perfectly services.
Nice. So we're testing RAM, the real user, the local website. What should, I know you mentioned in some blog posts as well, I think also doing some presentations, the TFB, the time
Time to first byte. Yeah.
Time to first byte. Is that the only thing they should be looking for, or is that the thing that has the most impact? As in, because of course there are a lot of things that you can do, because you like mentioned with perf matters where scripts should load. There is also a plugin about like to check the autoload on the WP options table, like which are like the firmware shit, because sometimes it might be too much for someone who's not specialized in performance. So from where can one start, and at what number should they start looking when they have just a local website, no caching, just testing their framework basically and building their framework?
Time to first byte. I mean, that's a really good question. Time to first byte is the first metric that is important when you're testing for performance. Time to first byte is essentially the waiting time that you have between you entering the URL in the address bar, you hit enter, that from the moment the browser starts processing that request and then presenting the actual full HTML of the page you requested, the first part of that is the time to first byte. And it's the time that it takes the server to respond with the application. Meaning, part of it is just how fast is your server. Part of it is how much time does WordPress need to spend to load its things. That time to first byte is stopped from the moment the WordPress application sends something back. It can still load on a whole bunch of other stuff. So your files and your CSS and your JavaScripts, all that sort of stuff, that's still, but that happens after the time the first byte is done. In other words, your time to first byte is a great indicator of how performant is my application server combination, meaning your WordPress, your plugins, your themes, plus the server it lives on. Your time to first byte is something that you should be testing uncached, because if you're caching, your time to first byte will absolutely decrease. Certainly if you use something like Cloudflare APO, which serves your full page caching from anywhere of its hundreds of data centers across the world. So wherever you are or wherever your site is, you will always see the fastest version. But your time to first byte should be cached. It's uncached, tested, uncached. Anything that happens there that is above 500 milliseconds is okay. You should start frowning. You should start raising questions. What am I doing here? If you're above a minute, you're way off the mark. Now, I'm well aware that there's plenty of sites where it's close to impossible to be below 500. And sometimes it's just a consequence of what that build looks like and what have you. But it should be your goal to be as close to under 500 milliseconds as you can be, because the rest of the time of that your site needs to be loaded is still needing to happen. So if it just takes half a second for your site to say, "Oh, okay, here you go," that's just too long. And sometimes it's a plugin. Sometimes it's a combination of plugins. Sometimes it's a literal combination of two plugins waiting on each other. Sometimes it's just poor hosting. But you test this uncached.
Interesting. Every page is different, because even what we're explaining, it's like some pages have certain scripts. Some scripts should load here. Some options should load here. So when you are testing, how many pages should you test? Like all different, like the home page, the contact us page. Like, how do you go about that, especially with bigger websites?
So I look at the pages that matter the most. So if there's a commercial purpose behind the page, it'll have a higher priority. Meaning, if I were to look at any site and I look at the landing pages, those have a high priority. If there's product pages, they have a high priority. Front page has a high priority. And then you look at the traffic, like what do people click on a lot? And sometimes that's not a landing page. Sometimes that's a specific subpage of whatever content is there. But you essentially take note of all the commercially vested type of pages. Those should have the highest priority, because that's what people really click on. And the higher your the performance observation of your site visitors is, the higher the likelihood of a conversion it is.
So you should definitely test more than one web, because I know most people just check the homepage like, oh, it's fine. And
Scanfully, which I mentioned in the intro, is a site health and a WordPress site health and performance monitoring tool. When we built it, we knew we were going to add a new feature at some point called priority pages. We only launched it. It's in beta currently.
It's us, right? It's SaaS.
It's SaaS. Yeah,
so,
yeah.
It's SaaS, yeah.
It connects to your WordPress site and does uptime monitoring and a whole bunch of other stuff. But one of the things that it does is making sure that we don't treat that one page of your site as this is the be all and end all. So we allow you to define 10 different priority pages. So for instance, you don't need to test every single landing page, but if you have a few landing pages, add them to it. If you want to be sure your contact page is up and running all the time, you add the contact page. So we're saying 10, but there's some sites that may need more or whatever. But the logic for sure is not just check your front page. That is not enough.
Interesting. Okay, so now that you have, you've built your framework and you know roughly how to build websites. Of course, the next step is web hosts. How do you go about usually about choosing a web host? I mean, of course, when it comes to caching, as you said, it's a very particular. You should look into this like on a one-to-one basis, because what works for someone doesn't necessarily work for someone else. But as a general rule of thumb, how do you go about looking for a good web host that works for your website?
As mentioned before, I have a elitist way of looking at it because I have to. Like, clients hire me to specifically solve performance problems, so I need to have performance be the most important thing solved by a hosting company. But in terms of finding the right hosting, there's, you get what you paid for is the first thing you need to understand. If you're looking at $30 a month and you're going, that's expensive, I have a very different opinion about that. I have hosting where I pay $100 a month and I'm absolutely perfectly happy with that, because it provides me a problem, and the problem is performance, and I don't need to think about performance because it's solved. Which means I can do much more on that type of machinery than I can do somewhere else. If the time to first byte is a problem, sometimes that's just the way the server of the particular hosting company is solving things. So if the time to first byte is solved by moving to a much faster hosting, I'm kind of bypassing the logic here. But if that solves a problem, do I really need to do that much more? I mean, yeah, in an ideal world, but sometimes that throwing better hosting at it is the solution for the problem. Time to first byte specifically is, and we touched this before already, but it's such an important metric. You want to know what the impact of your time to first byte is. What's funny to mention is the presentation I did in WordCamp Gdynia. The crowd of WP Bakery, which is a page builder, they were there, and they saw the presentation, and they went back home and they did a good testing of a whole bunch of page builders, looking at what is the impact of when we add a page builder to your site. And one of their conclusions was that their time to first byte was pretty good compared, but hey, there's always room for improvement. So, and ultimately that was the goal of the presentation, right? To have you think about the impact of the products that you service and build. But it's so important to have that time to first byte as a first thought when you're looking at performance. And an excellent host will have by default a very low time to first byte uncached. That's just how it works. So I always look at the whole stack of what is a customer willing to pay for it. If it's an e-commerce solution and they're making thousands per month in revenue with their site, they shouldn't blink twice if hosting costs $400, $500, $600 a month. They really shouldn't. If they are, they're in the wrong business. That's just not how it works. You get what you paid for. If it's a small brochure site of your local butcher or whatever, you may not need the fastest hosting. you may just be suffice with just having wonderful hosting and excellent caching. Get yourself Cloudflare APO. Like, once again, super simple to have all of your full page caching offloaded to the edge. There's no easier way to get a fast performing site than just introducing that. And then there's the whole array of everything that's in between. I have clients who pay thousands a month because in totality, what they're getting is what they need. And it's just,
but the holy grail is you should always start with the DFB, and that also already telling you a lot about the host.
Yeah, it's the best indicator we have for raw hosting. There's a whole bunch of other metrics that you can look into, and you should look into WP hosting benchmark by Kevin Ohashi or Review Signal. He does a yearly testing round of a whole bunch of hosting companies, and the way he measures is raw data. So whatever his data tells you is what it tells you, and then you'll look at the hosting companies that end up on top, and you have a good idea of who is always fast in every single case, cached, uncached. He explains it all.
Interesting. Whenever I look into WordPress performance, or I try to learn a bit more about it, there's a lot of noise about images, image size, image delivery. Is it something we are kind of like overlooking, or like giving it too much focus and it's not needed?
Compared to all the things we've discussed so far, image optimization is very low in priority. Yes, you need to do it, and you need to pay good attention to it, but it's a relatively easy one to fix. It's not difficult.
Yeah, optimize the images.
The optimizing images, there's a super fun plugin that actually allows you to optimize the image as you're uploading it from the browser. That plugin is called, I think it's pronounced CIMU, is CIMU. And install this on all your clients' websites, and they'll never uploading a huge 24 MB image again. And it optimizes, and it does a whole bunch of other stuff. You still want to do an optimizing the delivery of the images strategy, which is usually a caching plugin. Use NitroPack, WP Rocket, APO, all of that, or I should probably say Cloudflare Pro, not just APO. But yes, optimizing images is relatively straightforward. There's no rocket science. You need to do it, but I don't consider it the highest priority in sequence. It's in my top 10 things to do, but it's not number one. It's not number two. It's not number 5, 6. It's somewhere at the end where, yeah, of course you need to optimize images.
Interesting. And what are some of the other things you read about that you think like it's they don't have so much of a big impact kind of thing?
Yeah, so there's stuff that optimize your databases, turn off revisions, that sort of stuff. I don't. If the database, if you have a hosting company that the database starts performing so much better by deleting your revisions, you have a poor hosting company. It's just simple as that. A lot of these advices that you see are remnants of older times. WordPress is 20 years old, so the first 10 years. You for sure had to do these types of things because hosting companies were also still learning and improving and all that sort of stuff. If you want to remove bloat from the database because it makes sense, please do so, because for whatever reason. But don't think that removing your revisions is necessarily making WordPress faster. The same goes, well, the thing that I would pay attention to is, and we slightly touched upon it already, is the options optimizer. There is a plugin by Joost de Valk. It's called AAA, so AAA Optimizer.
Something like that, yeah.
And what that plugin does, it gives you an insight into what is being loaded by default on every single page load from your database. And again, there's a limit. I think it's 500 KB that it says below that is where you want to be. But that plugin gives you the option to delete stuff that is loaded on every single page load that it really doesn't need to have loaded on every single page load. So your time to first byte, your WordPress thinking as it gets the request and then produces, one of the things it does, it loads in these options. So if that's a 1 MB of options that need to be loaded on every single page load, doesn't make a lot of sense. So you want to optimize that, because that brings down your time to first byte as well.
Of course, because it's executed, the options table is one of the first things that's executed by WordPress, right? That's right.
I have an article on my blog as well, which is WordPress's entire loading sequence, including the full site editing themes and the sequence that's related to that. It's a bit technical, but it gives you a good example of what WordPress needs to do before it can start to produce. And then if you look at all the hooks and all the things it does, you realize there's a ton of opportunity to screw this up.
Interesting. So for those who are listening, maybe who are not that technical, because not everyone, of course, especially as you said, if you're like a small bakery or a small butcher shop and you have your own website, maybe, or a small business managing your own website, what are the most, on top of the TFB, what are the most kind of effective things, low-hanging fruit, highest impact performance improvements they can do in the next 24 hours?
I think we've touched on all of them already. So understanding that if you can have edge caching, please do so. Use one of the optimizers, one of the caching plugins that I've mentioned. Look into Perf Matters. They have great documentation. Even if you're not super technically inclined, they explain pretty well what the impact of the option of choice is. You have the options optimizer plugin. That's a good one to look at. And at the very least, what you can do right now is look at your entire WordPress application and try to make sure that everything that is turned on and activated needs to be there. So if there's a plugin that is not activated, delete it. If there's a plugin that is active that you really don't need, or it just solves one really small thing but also does 10 other things, turn it off, delete it, find one that just solves that one problem you need to have fixed. Chances are that one lean, mean plugin will do it more efficiently.
Yeah, that's why in general, I like to use plugins, which do one single thing, rather than a plugin that tries to do everything under the sun. Because usually you might end up with a plugin, a lot of bloat, and you're only using 20% of its functionality.
Yeah, so the sites that I mentioned that have more that I manage that have more than 100 plugins activated, those are tons of plugins just do something really, really smartly, very, very efficiently. And they can still be a lot of code, but just exclude whenever they don't need to do anything. So they're literally only doing the thing they need to be doing when they need to be doing on the page load. They need to do it for the time that they need to be doing it. And if you have plugins like that, they will always win in terms of performance and just overall maintainability of your site.
Of course, yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. What is your ideal setup in terms of performance? Maybe can you share a snippet of your website's tech stack usually? remkusvries.com.
In what way? Like, because I could.
What are your favorite plugins? Which web hosts do you use? What's your tech stack of remkusvries.com?
So I am using Ollie as a theme. Remkusvries.com is an experimental site for me, so it's not always the fastest. Just simply because I constantly run experiments and play with settings and configurations.
Which is expected usually.
Yeah, so that means I have more running than I should be. I love how I'm exactly contradicting my previous advice with my own advice with my own site here, but that's how you learn. I'm running that on Surfbolt hosting, including their accelerated domains add-on. I have Perf Matters active there. The option optimizer, Scanfully, and the rest of the site is built as lean and mean as I can. But again, there's a lot of experimentation going on. I think this is a good example of where when I said earlier, build your foundation, build your blueprint for the sites that you're building. I have about 5, maybe 6, depends on how you look at it. I have a couple of those depending on the purpose they serve. So I have a blueprint for types of sites that are mine. I have a blueprint for WordPress multi-sites. I have a blueprint for WordPress WooCommerce solutions. I have a blueprint that is still a classic theme, but in certain cases, I have still clients on classic themes where there's a whole bunch of optimizations and stuff happening with small MU plugins and little funky things we're doing. So my stack, I think the extent of the plugins that I have running everywhere is pretty much that. I'm a big fan of 2 particular form plugins. One of them is Gravity Forms. The other is WS Form. SEO, I think I shared. I use essentially SEO Framework or Yoast SEO, depending on the need. I'm sure I'm forgetting stuff here, but relatively lean.
Yeah, good overview. Thanks a lot, Remkus. Did we miss anything, or do you want to mention something particular before we end this episode?
I mean, I do myself a disservice if I didn't mention that I have a pre-launch of my Make WordPress Fast course on withinwp.com. If you want to learn all the details and everything in between of what I've shared today, it's 25 modules and it launches somewhere this month, and you can get it at a discount now. Also check out scanfully.com. We do some fun stuff, and we're going to be adding a lot more fun stuff in the months to come. But other than that, I think we covered a whole bunch of questions and angles and different approaches. Yeah. Check out my blog, subscribe to my newsletter, all that sort of jazz. It's in there. Go to withinwp.com. You can subscribe easily. I run a weekly newsletter that is focusing on the tooling of WordPress, performance and security minded. Big fan of your 2FA plugin. It's a wonderful plugin. And yes, you should have that by default. It should not be a 90,000 plugin thing. They should be a millions, like for real. But yeah, I think, I don't know what else. I mean,
no, that's it. Actually, yeah, I was going to ask you where can people find you on top, of course, of Scamfluency product. But yeah, you mentioned you have withinwp.com and also Remkus Vries, which is Remkus DEVRIES.
I have an easier one for you. RAMK.US.
Okay, there you go. REMK. So yeah, if you want to learn more about Remkus, go to remk.us and you'll find all the information you need from there, right?
Yep.
Thanks a lot, everyone, for following. Thanks, Remkus, and we'll see you next week. Thanks, Remkus.
All right, man. Bye-bye.
Thanks.